Football is a very serious game. 22 adults run around a rectangle of grass, chasing a ball, while audiences drink beer, hooligans rediscover medieval combat, and commentators talk about formations as if discussing constitutional law. Americans call it soccer, which is, to be honest, a linguistic crime. A foot kicking a ball equals football. The British invented the slang, abandoned it, and then the Americans picked it up and decided to be unique. But whatever we call it, football has one great political advantage. The rule is simple. 1 ball, 2 goals, 90 minutes. Simple enough for children, emotionally high for adults, and useful enough for dictators. Yes, you've probably guessed it. Our respected supreme leader, Kim Jong-un, is a huge football fan. To the Western world, Comrade Kim is better known as a passionate basketball guy with a truly bizarre friendship with Dennis Rodman. But His Majesty is actually a low-key member of the Red Army. No, neither the Chinese nor the Soviet Red Army, but the British one. Former Italian Senator Antonio Razzi, who visited North Korea frequently, claims that Kim Jong-un privately admitted he is a devoted fan of Manchester United. He watched all major tournaments and used to be a big fan of England legend Wayne Rooney. During his teenage years in a Swiss boarding school, the young prince repeatedly visited Milan to watch matches at the San Siro. With such a sporty leader, it is not hard to see why football is the undisputed #1 national sport of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Here, football is entertainment after the party's inspections and censorship. This very sport offers the Kim regime something precious, a global language that does not require democracy, open markets, or any internet connection. In the world of football, bodies, discipline, repetition, and the state's investment will turn playful children into obedient athletes. No election is needed to score from a corner, and the international press would focus on the sportsmanship instead of the dictatorship. Football is remarkably useful for propaganda. The state can choreograph applause and mandate collective joy. In this episode, we explore the weird world of North Korea's football empire. We will start from the 1966 World Cup miracle that gave the regime another myth of socialist superiority. Then, the career of Kwang-song, a prodigious North Korean striker, will tell you that UN sanctions are much harder to beat than Italian defenders. We take a look at the mysterious North Korean domestic league, where football clubs operate as extensions of military divisions. And finally, there is the relentless, highly regimented youth system that turned the North Korean girls into FIFA champions. But before we blow the opening whistle, a brief interruption for our weekly ritual of saluting our loyal channel members. Thanks for sponsoring our production and footing our electricity bills. You are the one who ensures our computers are on, even when the rest of the Kimdom experiences a blackout. We really appreciate it. And if you are new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Stay alerted and don't miss our weekly show. Thank you. Now, back to the pitch. Let's kick it.
The Pyongyang International Football School invented and introduced the measuring apparatus capable of analyzing and evaluating the students' physical abilities comprehensively, thus making successes in training.
1966, England, the World Cup, a tournament held in the country that invented modern football during the height of the Cold War. The world was neatly divided by an Iron Curtain and nuclear anxiety, and football was the only activity in which people discovered a little bit of international friendship. Back then, North Korea was largely a phantom state to the Western world. It was an isolated country, living in the shadow of the Korean War. When they somehow qualified for the World Cup in England, the British Foreign Office practically had a panic attack, since Britain didn't even have diplomatic relations with Pyongyang. Granting those athletes entrance to Great Britain felt like a political endorsement of a rogue communist state. Highly classified internal memos circulated in London about whether playing the DPRK national anthem would trigger an international incident, or even worse, offend South Korea and the Americans. In the end, the British government allowed them in. The World Cup was a very intense international competition, and presumably, those mysterious athletes from the East would be quietly humiliated on the pitch and sent home before anyone understood the lyrics to their anthem. The Brits were right. When the squad arrived in Middlesbrough, a bleak, working-class industrial town in the northeast of England, the team wasn't impressive at all. Apparently, those North Koreans were very disciplined, but entirely closed off from the press and utterly alien to the local culture. Anyway, they were not considered a dark horse. With average heights notably shorter than their European counterparts, the North Korean Facebook team was more treated like a rumor. Drawn into a brutal group, the campaign went exactly as the British diplomats had hoped. They were outclassed by the Soviet Union, losing 3-0. I don't know if there's any match fixing back to the '66, but losing to the big brother Soviet was practically a family argument. It made sense. Next, they scraped a hard-fought 1-1 draw against Chile, still alive. But then there was the win-or-die match against Italy. I mean, literally to win or to die. Here came the Italians, who viewed the sport with a religious piety and treated tactical defending as a high art and victory as a divine right. Well, North Korea was a new rival. Not much knowledge about them. It didn't stop the Italian squad from expecting a comfortable, effortless win. However, at Ayers Park, the unthinkable happened. North Korea played with a ferocious, lung-bursting intensity, chasing down every loose ball as if their lives depended on it. In the 42nd minute, a 23-year-old North Korean army man named Pak Do-ik received the ball inside the penalty area. He struck a low, precise shot into the goal. Boom! North Korea defeated Italy 1-0. The Italians panicked, throwing everything at the North Korean defense, but the men in red held firm. When the final whistle blew, North Korea eliminated the two-time world champions and went into the quarter-finals. The Italian squad went home in absolute disgrace. They got back to the Genoa airport only to be pelted with rotten tomatoes by furious, humiliated fans. Meanwhile, something unusual happened in Middlesbrough. The working-class English locals, people who spent their days in steel mills and chemical plants, absolutely fell in love with this socialist football team. They adopted them as another of their own. Thousands of local fans bought red shirts and followed the team to their next match, waving banners and cheering for the communist underdogs. English factory workers screaming themselves hoarse in solidarity with North Korean military athletes. Truly one of the strangest and most beautiful cultural paradoxes of the Cold War, wasn't it? With that single victory, North Korea became the first Asian team to ever reach a World Cup quarter-final. The quarter-final took place at Goodison Park in Liverpool, where the team of Juche faced Portugal, led by the legendary striker Eusebio. What followed was one of the most absurd and spectacular matches in World Cup history. Riding the adrenaline of the Middlesbrough miracle, North Korea launched a blistering attack. They scored in the very first minute. 20 minutes later, another one. By the 25th minute, North Korea had taken an unbelievable 3-0 lead. For 25 glorious socialist minutes, state propaganda was on the verge of receiving the greatest script ever written for the country's greatest victory. The narrative was perfect. The brave, morally pure socialist athletes dismantling the decadent, colonialist Western powers on the world's biggest stage. Back in Pyongyang, One can only imagine the sheer ecstasy of the party elites preparing the headlines for the morning papers. Then Eusebio woke up. The Portuguese legend, known as the Black Panther, decided that he was not going to be a footnote in a North Korean propaganda film. He took the match by the scruff of the neck and unleashed an absolute beast. He scored his first goal just before half-time, then he scored a penalty, then another after another. Eusebio single-footedly dismantled the North Korean defense, scoring 4 goals in total. Portugal completed a ruthless, historic comeback, ultimately winning the match 5-3. Though defeated, it was still a miracle. Just the perfect propaganda film was interrupted by a man from Mozambique with extraordinary finishing. The North Korean team went home to a complicated legacy. The state quickly went to work. They polished the narrative for better ideological effects. The glorious victory over Italy was endlessly celebrated, presented to the domestic population as absolute proof of the superiority of Juche ideology and the brilliance of the great leader's guidance. The spectacular collapse against Portugal was quietly minimized, framed merely as a temporary setback against overwhelming imperialist odds. Then, the 66's North Korean football team became a myth of itself. The aftermath for the players was the subject of intense, dark speculation from the West. Rumors persisted that the team was severely punished upon returning home, sent to labor camps for celebrating too heavily after the Italy match, or for losing focus against Portugal. Only decades later, a documentary crew found several surviving members of the squad living in relative comfort in Pyongyang, where they were presented as national decorations. But just remember, in the Kimdom, the line between a revered hero and a political prisoner is notoriously thin, and history sometimes could be cruel. The men of 1966 gave the regime a miracle, a story so brilliant that it sustained the illusion of North Korean sporting greatness for decades. But miracles are, by their very nature, unrepeatable. And as the global game rapidly modernized, the ghost of Pak Duik's goal would hang over every generation that followed, trapping North Korean men's football in the shadow of a glorious, heavily redacted past.
Successes are reported in training reserve sports players. The Pyongyang International Football School has selected students with good intellectual faculties and physical conditions from across the country in this new school year, and further perfected teaching methods in a theoretical way, actively applying them to the educational practice.
The 1966 miracle was a national treasure, as well as a suffocating trap. The men who defeated Italy had etched a permanent mythology into the state apparatus. The team defined a new standard, and sportsmen from the entire country suffered for it. While North Korea locked its doors and demanded absolute self-reliance, modern football evolved at a terrifying pace. The global game transformed into an open, ruthless market defined by elite academies, global scouting networks, advanced nutrition, and data analytics. Its players had absolute physical discipline, military-level obedience, limitless stamina, rigid defensive organization, and patriotic calling. But modern football isn't the military world games. It requires the constant exchange of players, coaches, tactical experiments, and the freedom to fail in open competition. The game is tactical, not like working in labor camps. So, deservedly, it took 44 years for the North Korean men to return to the World Cup. In 2010, they arrived in South Africa surrounded by mystery and were drawn into a punishing group featuring Brazil, Portugal, and Côte d'Ivoire. As the North Korean national anthem echoed through Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg, the opening match against Brazil began with a spectacle of raw emotion and geopolitical theatre. The cameras panned across the players. Striker Jong Tae-se wept openly, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the sheer pressure and perhaps some pride and sorrow of representing a pseudo-nuclear state on the world stage. The global media immediately seized on the image. Western commentators, conditioned by decades of Cold War rhetoric, assumed he was crying out of sheer communist brainwashing or a fierce, terrifying nationalist devotion to the dear leader. Out of humour and respect, the Western press nicknamed him the People's Rooney. However, the truth was far more complex and deeply ironic. Jong Tae-se was weeping because he was a man without a true country, who had finally found a stage to stand on. Jong was not born in Pyongyang. He was born in Nagoya, Japan, to parents of Korean descent. As a third-generation Zainichi Korean, his family remained in Japan after the end of colonial rule and the division of the peninsula. By the strict laws of international nationality, Jong inherited South Korean citizenship through his father. Wait, what? Jong was a South Korean national? Weirdly, yes. The Overseas Koreans Act grants foreign nationals of Korean descent South Korean citizenship. But at the same time, Jong's mother was from the north and was affiliated with Chongryon, the pro-Pyongyang General Association of Korean residents in Japan. Consequently, the young boy was educated in North Korean schools and graduated from the Korea University in Tokyo. Jong Tae-se grew up navigating the neon-lit streets of Japan while sitting in classrooms where he learned to sing the praises of the supreme leaders. When it came time to pursue international football, Jong did not want to play for Japan. Well, Japan didn't need him anyway. Despite holding a South Korean passport, he felt no allegiance to Seoul. Well, Seoul didn't need him either. Jong wasn't a top-tier footballer that those East Asian countries would launch colonial wars for. But legally and sport-wise, if he could score a North Korean passport, he would become the Kim regime's best striker and make a clout in the World Cup. Through the bureaucratic alchemy of Chongryon and a heartfelt conviction, he obtained a DPRK passport and other travel docs. Then, the Asian Football Confederation and FIFA surprisingly approved his eligibility, although our man had never lived in North Korea and spoke primarily Japanese. Now on, Jong was the undisputed star of the North Korean national team. The regime picked him because he was a phenomenal striker by North Korean standards. He was aggressive, technically gifted, and possessed a sheer physical force that earned him the nickname Human Bulldozer. But at the same time, he was a propaganda headache. He played professionally in the J-League for Kawasaki Frontale. He loved luxury cars, designer clothes, and snowboarding, driving his Hummer to Niseko with his Gucci bags. Anyway, we will leave these troubles to the North Korean propagandists. Back to the pitch in Johannesburg, that opening match against Brazil. Against the most glamorous and fluid team on earth, the North Koreans played with disciplined, almost military resilience. They packed the defense, tracked every run, and frustrated the Brazilians for nearly an hour before conceding 2 second-half goals. But they did not collapse. In the dying minutes, Jong Tae-se bravely fought off 3 Brazilian defenders to head a perfectly weighted pass to his teammate Ji Yun-nam. Comrade Ji sprinted into the penalty area and smashed a brilliant late goal past Julio Cesar. North Korea lost a highly respectable 2-1. For one brief, shining night, the ghost of 1966 felt vividly alive. The world wondered if another miracle was unfolding. Then came Portugal, again. In 1966, North Korea succumbed to Eusebio's brilliance. In 2010, the Portuguese dismantled them 7-0 in the pouring rain in Cape Town. Same opponent, different century, worse ending, a complete disaster. To make things worse, the match was unusually broadcast live on Korean Central Television, a rare and deeply consequential departure from North Korea's usual caution. The state media apparatus prefers delay, careful editing, and face-saving redactions, but this time they believed in another miracle and aired it. Unfortunately, It only proved that live football was a terrible idea. As the Portuguese midfield carved the North Korean defense apart, scoring 6 times in the second half, the Pyongyang broadcasters were left to narrate a public execution. The powerful Juche state could threaten the world with its A-bombs, but it could not ask Cristiano Ronaldo to stop at 4. Following the humiliation, head coach Kim Jong-un took responsibility, admitting he had chosen the wrong tactical strategy and that his team had technically collapsed. Then, North Korea's final match against Côte d'Ivoire ended with a 3-0 elimination. The team said goodbye to South Africa without a single point earned. In the aftermath of the tournament, reports emerged claiming that the squad and coach were subjected to public ideological criticism at the Working People's Culture Palace in Pyongyang. Some further suggested that the team faced severe punitive measures, such as being sent to construction sites and labor camps. In normal countries, losing 7-0 is a football disaster. In the Kimdom, the loss becomes a management problem. Defeat, in effect, suggested an ideological failure. To be honest, the North Korean squad wasn't bad per se. They were physically fit, deeply committed, and tactically disciplined. But they were trapped in a paranoid system which suffocated them between a heroic, untouchable past and a political mission to make North Korea proud again. Finally, it only proved that you cannot defeat a billion-dollar European tactical ecosystem with sheer ideological willpower. The 7-0 demolition became such a national embarrassment that it had personally insulted a young man preparing to inherit the Kimdom. Kim Jong-un was not yet the supreme leader in 2010, but he was the designated heir apparent. One anecdotal account from João Micaelo, a Portuguese childhood friend of Kim, who later visited Pyongyang in 2012. João recalled playfully teasing his old supreme schoolmate about Portugal winning 7-0, and apparently that the 7-0 defeat was a sore subject that even the supreme leader found hard to swallow. As for Jong Tae-se, his post-World Cup career only amplified his status as the ultimate geopolitical paradox. He used the tournament as a springboard to play in Germany, signing for VfL Bochum and later 1FC Köln. Then, in 2013, he abruptly switched sides. The proud North Korean striker signed a contract to play in the South Korean K-League, joining the Suwon Samsung Blue Wings. Eventually, Jong Tae-se returned to Japan to finish his career with Shimizu S-Pulse and Albirex Niigata, but not before completing his total transformation from socialist athletic hero to capitalist celebrity. He began appearing on South Korean reality television and was completely forgotten by the North Korean propaganda machine.
A new football school was built in Wonsan City of Gangwon Province. The school is fully equipped with classrooms for education of general subjects and football theory, playground and dormitory. As a result, a solid foundation for training reserve footballers of the province has been laid.
Blaming the athletes for failure leads to nothing except for more failures. The 2010 World Cup disaster was a direct result of the murky, never institutionalized North Korean football ecosystem. Before 2010, even the most seasoned analysts didn't have a clear picture of the North Korean Football League. At the heart of this clandestine sports operation lies the April 25th Sports Club. Named after the founding date of the Korean People's Army, April 25th isn't a football club in any commercial sense that we'd recognize. It's a massive military institution where players are drafted like soldiers and utilized as strategic assets. You know, in the Kimdom, football isn't for consumer amusement, but for high-stakes institutional prestige. There are other clubs, like Pyongyang Sports Club, Rimyong-su, Kigwon-cha, Huebul, and Naegohyang. These names do not function like Arsenal, Barcelona, or Boca Juniors. April 25th is linked to the army. Amnok Gang is associated with the police. Kigwancha, the locomotive team, belongs to the world of the state-owned railway. All these teams compete in a domestic league, contesting trophies like the Huebul Cup or the Mangyongdae Prize. The tournaments act as a constant reminder that sport, like everything in the Kimdom, is just another form of politics. In England, a football club sells replica shirts, lucrative broadcast rights, betting partnerships, behind-the-scenes documentaries, and weekly emotional damage. But in socialist Korea, a club represents a ministry, a city, a military body, or a specific state institution. The league is, in this sense, very private, competitive, and closely supervised. These cups and championships matter, but only as vanity projects for the leader. So, a system designed like this can effortlessly produce discipline, hierarchy, and an unbreakable collective structure that everyone runs hard in pitch, defends with their lives, and suffers collectively. But modern football doesn't believe in military-style training. If the 2010 World Cup had taught the supreme leader something, it is that the state could not simply blame the evil imperialist Portuguese for international shame. It was a systemic failure. If North Korea demanded athletic prestige on the global stage, sheer patriotic suffering was not enough. A completely self-reliant nation suddenly needed foreign academies. Juche needed Serie A. The young, promising strikers needed a passport to train and compete abroad. This realization birthed a state-backed modernization initiative. In 2013, the regime established the Pyongyang International Football School, a centralized academy designed to forge elite talent through rigorous survival of the fittest testing. Simultaneously, they began quietly sending hand-picked young prospects to Europe, placing them in Spanish and Italian football academies. Out of this unprecedented experiment emerged a truly phenomenal player. His name was Han Kwang-song. Born in Pyongyang in 1998, Han was the crown jewel of a very successful youth generation that won the 2014 AFC U16 championship. Through the state's secret connection, he got a ticket to Italy. He developed into a complete modern forward. He was quick, technically brilliant, aggressive, and capable of operating anywhere across the front line. He represented the ultimate, paradoxical ambition of the North Korean sports ministry, a homegrown socialist athlete polished by European coaching, ready to conquer the capitalist leagues before bringing the glory home. He signed with Cagliari, and in April 2017, he made history by becoming the first North Korean to ever play in Serie A. Shortly after, he became the first to score in the Italian top flight, heading a dramatic goal past England goalkeeper Joe Hart in a match against Torino. Finally, the Kimdom had a genuine, terrifyingly real prospect, not a political mascot. To gain more experience, Cagliari sent him on loan to Perugia in Serie B. Han responded by scoring a hat-trick on his debut. His outstanding performances, as well as mysterious background, electrified the league, attracting the intense scrutiny of Europe's elite clubs and sparking relentless media speculation. In 2019, he reached the absolute pinnacle of the Italian football pyramid, moving to Juventus. The 21-year-old Han played for their U23 squad in Serie C, getting tantalizingly close to the first-team environment of one of the biggest, most glamorous clubs in the world. He was sharing a training complex with global superstars, operating at a level no North Korean player had ever reached. However, in January 2020, Juventus abruptly sold him to Al Duhail in Qatar for millions of euros. Han arrived in the Middle East, scored crucial goals, and helped his new team win the domestic league title. But what had begun as an impossible football fairy tale was rapidly mutating into a multinational sanction. Since 2016, A series of intercontinental ballistic missile launches led the UN Security Council to pass rounds of resolutions against North Korea. Among its sweeping and punitive economic restrictions, the resolution explicitly required member states to repatriate all North Korean nationals earning income abroad within 24 months, with basically no exceptions. The geopolitical logic was uncompromising and demanding to a football career. The international community worried that those overseas workers and athletes were being used as illicit revenue streams, bringing foreign currency back to Pyongyang to fund the regime's nuclear program. Han's career was trapped inside that suspicion. If he were earning a lucrative professional salary in Italy or Qatar, international authorities had to ask whether that income was a personal athletic reward or a direct financial channel for a dictatorship. His overseas career was effectively destroyed in 2021. Reports confirmed that his contract with Al Dahail was terminated to comply with international sanctions, forcing his immediate deportation from Qatar. Then, the global pandemic made a desperate situation apocalyptic. North Korea completely closed its borders, implementing the strictest quarantine measures on Earth and refusing entry even to its own citizens stranded abroad. Kwang-song spent a long period stuck in diplomatic transit, living in a suspended reality at an undisclosed foreign embassy, completely unable to resume a normal club career or return home. The most promising North Korean male footballer of his generation simply vanished from the public eye for nearly 3 years. When he eventually resurfaced late in 2023, Han played in World Cup qualifying matches for North Korea against Syria and Myanmar. But the damage to his professional trajectory was absolute. A player who should have been entering his athletic prime in a top European league was instead permanently sidelined by a geopolitical blockade. Han's story is a tragedy. Most professional footballers worry about torn ligaments, greedy agents, and incompetent managers. But Kwang-song had to worry about the United Nations Security Council, which is slightly harder to work with. Han did exactly what the regime said it wanted. He proved that a North Korean could compete and thrive at the highest levels of the modern game. The problems were the international law and the lack of a professional domestic league.
The Dongdaewon District Extracurricular Sports School introduced more than 10 new teaching and training methods this year, including the teaching method of enhancing the mental control capacity and the scoring sense in the ball games, thus further improving the competition ability of students. The Daedonggang District Extracurricular Sports School is training a lot of promising reserve players by steadily raising the scientific level of teaching and training under the guidance and with the assistance of officials of the District Sports Guidance Committee.
While audiences and global media naturally and misogynically gravitate toward the men, the real story of North Korean football lies elsewhere. The men gave Pyongyang a miracle almost 60 years ago, a singular event to be endlessly broadcast and selectively remembered. But miracles are poor foundations for the national sports development. The women, on the other hand, built a talent machine, which is kind of dominating on the world stage. I mean, we have to recognize some rare moments of pragmatic brilliance from the North Korean sports ministry. In the late 1980s, global women's football was still largely amateur, underfunded, and underdeveloped. The regime saw an open window. Since they only needed propaganda wins, why not go compete in some of the less competitive fields for a better result? They realized that if they threw the full, terrifying weight of a command economy at a sport the rest of the world was treating as an add-on, they could manufacture global prestige. Just to find an emerging market and dominate it. The investment paid off with breakneck speed. The North Korean women's team became the absolute queens of Asian football, winning the AFC Women's Asian Cup in 2001, 2003, and 2008. Just like the men's team, the female footballers were ferocious, incredibly fit, and tactically disciplined. In 2007, the team reached the quarter-finals of the FIFA Women's World Cup, becoming the living legends of the DPRK sports world. But then came the interruption. It was a kind of surreal, bureaucratic absurdity that only Pyongyang can produce. During the 2011 Women's World Cup in Germany, 5 North Korean players failed anti-doping tests. When confronted by sporting authorities, the North Korean delegation offered a very creative, state-of-the-art fictional excuse. They gravely claimed that the players had been struck by lightning in a training camp prior to the tournament. To treat the resulting shock, the team doctor had supposedly administered a traditional medicinal remedy derived from the musk glands of deer, which just so happened to contain banned steroids. FIFA, very surprised by the musk deer lightning shock therapy defense, rejected the appeal. Thus, the women's team was hit hard with severe sanctions, including a total ban from the 2015 Women's World Cup. Following this disgrace, the senior team failed to qualify for the 2019 tournament, and then the global pandemic arrived. North Korea hermetically sealed its borders, plunging the national teams into years of total competitive isolation. But behind those closed borders, the youth machine never stopped running. The state doubled down on its centralized factory of football talent. Remember that Pyongyang International Football School, founded in 2013. Unlike other boy-dominated football schools, nearly half of its student body were girls selected from across the provinces. The state covers all living and training expenses, going so far as to permit these students some restricted access to the real World Wide Web, so they can study foreign match footage. Inside the school, the fight for the roster was a ruthlessly Darwinian competition. The bottom 10% of students are systematically eliminated and sent home every year, saying goodbye to their relatively comfortable Pyongyang life. For the outperformers, the physical demands border on the superhuman. The girls are subjected to weekly 12,000-meter high-intensity running tests, and anyone who fails must repeat the test until they pass. They are required to complete 3 grueling training sessions every single day, regardless of rain, snow, or heat, forging a collective tactical muscle memory that is impossible to replicate in any European youth club. This brutal, highly organized pipeline produces absolute global dominance. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea won the FIFA Under-20 Women's World Cup in 2006, 2016, and again in 2024. Their 2024 campaign in Colombia was a masterclass in both preparation and strategy execution. The U20 team won all 7 of their matches, posting a terrifying aggregate score of 25-4 against the best youth teams on earth. They dismantled traditional powerhouses and ultimately defeated Japan 1-0 in the final. A brilliant young forward named Choi Il-son scored the winning goal and swept the major individual honours, taking home the Golden Boot as the tournament's top scorer. This dominance extends flawlessly to the younger brackets. The North Korean girls won the FIFA U17 Women's World Cup in 2008, 2016, 2024, and then incredibly won it again in 2025. A one-off win is a miracle. 8 global youth titles spanning 2 decades are a systematic advantage. The players themselves deserve immense, unreserved respect. The girls are highly skilled, incredibly fast, unyieldingly brave, and tactically serious. Although the state propaganda says that the girls are powered by Juche and inspired by the supreme leader, those young ladies probably couldn't afford to lose. You know, this is North Korea, and you should seriously think about your family and your future career before doing anything. Anyhow, they always execute their game plans with a flawless, synchronized intensity that leaves opponents gasping for air. And their athletic perfection internally validates the Kimdom's socialist superiority. When the 2024 U20 champions returned to Pyongyang, the party apparatus exploded with joy. The girls were treated as conquering military heroes. I personally won't be surprised if the leader decides to build another arch of triumph for the country's women's football teams. Huge crowds lined from the capital's tarmac to the spacious boulevard, waving flowers and weeping as the celebration bus rolled past. Kim Jong-un personally received the champions at the Workers' Party headquarters. State media released heavily choreographed photos and videos of the supreme leader beaming with pride, surrounded by the young women who were crying tears of absolute devotion. He praised their victory as a profound source of national unity. The trophy was weaponized, held up to the starving population as undeniable proof that the state could still produce greatness and beat the imperialist enemy in peaceful sports matches. But this overwhelming youth success leads us to the ultimate puzzle. If the North Korean youth teams are an unstoppable force of nature, why does that dominance not translate directly into senior global domination? The answer lies in the fundamental structural differences between youth football and the modern senior game. Youth tournaments heavily reward early selection, extreme physical conditioning, endless repetition, and collective structure. Parents from wealthy societies are typically unwilling to send their kids to a labor camp like football camp, sacrificing their children's childhood for the vanity of the state. I mean, if your 9-year-old were a football talent, would you send the kiddo to a normal school or a nightmarish, physically demanding football academy? In an open society, very few parents are willing to do so. In contrast, a centralized, authoritarian sports system is perfectly designed to excel at youth sports. They can gather the best talent at age 7, regardless of how the parents feel, put them in an isolated camp, and train them until they operate with the synchronized precision of a socialist engine. In international youth tournaments, where opposing teams are often hastily assembled groups of teenagers who rarely met before, North Korea's tactical familiarity and overwhelming stamina were the cheat code. Youth games do not rely on complex, possession-based philosophies that require years of professional league experience. They rely on simple, direct, relentless football combat, like real soldiers. Attacks, rapid counterattacks, aggressive crosses from the wings, and devastating set pieces. During North Korea's recent U17 World Cup victory, an astonishing 15 of their 22 goals came directly from counterattacks or set pieces. It is a system built to minimize individual errors and maximize collective physical superiority. Senior football is much messier, and it refuses to be controlled. As global women's football professionalized over the last decade, particularly across Europe and the Americas, senior players are now forged in high-intensity, commercially massive domestic leagues. They play high-stakes matches week in and week out, earning professional salaries, utilizing advanced sports science, and working with international coaches just like their male counterparts. Further, the matches they play require tactical diversity, the ability to read unpredictable opponents, and the absolute freedom for players to fail, learn, and adapt on the fly. North Korea's overwhelming strengths in the youth games are precisely their fatal weak points for senior matches. Those 20-year-olds are physically capable, drilled to absolute perfection, but they are not trained to think freely. Moreover, the senior women's team, in general, lacks the oxygen of a high-level professional ecosystem. They cannot transfer to Chelsea or Barcelona to learn new tactical wrinkles. They cannot import foreign managers to modernize their pressing triggers. The girls are trapped in the exact same closed domestic loop, playing against the identical state-sponsored clubs year after year. They attend global senior tournaments, trying to defeat the finest products of a billion-dollar commercial ecosystem by strategic isolation and juche willpower. This explains the paradox. The youth teams are built for controlled victory, and the athletes are tasked to win directly for the propaganda machine. But senior football punishes control and requires the freedom to adapt. And yet, despite these overwhelming structural disadvantages, the machine is starting to hum again in the senior games. After years in the anti-doping scrutiny, the DPRK senior team returned to the spotlight at the 2023 Asian Games, winning silver just behind Japan. In March 2026, the team arrived at the AFC Women's Asian Cup in Australia. Brave ladies fought their way out of the group stage before losing a fiercely close 2-1 quarter-final to the host nation. With this latest development, North Korea's senior women's team may soon shock the world at the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil, where they have already secured a ticket. It will be their biggest comeback for the first time since the legendary 2011 musk deer incident. And we will see if sheer, relentless discipline can finally shatter the glass ceiling of modern professional football. North Korean football is legendary. If you travel to the old site of Airsom Park in Middlesbrough, you will find a quiet, unexpected monument. There, stamped permanently into the ground, is a bronze boot print commemorating Pak Duik's historic 1966 win against Italy. It is a physical reminder of a time when the British working class fell in love with a group of unknown socialist athletes. It was a beautiful, fleeting connection born of pure sporting romance, a historical anomaly from a time when global football still allowed for absolute miracles. According to FIFA's official profile, North Korea currently operates 53 senior clubs and houses 2,712 registered players, neatly divided across 3 National League divisions for both men and women. Football is North Korea's national sport, and this is not a chaotic, disorganized wasteland for amateurs. At the absolute center of this socialist structure stands the Rungrado 1st of May Stadium in Pyongyang, an arena that FIFA recognizes as the largest football stadium in the world, possessing a mind-boggling capacity of 150,000 spectators. The existence of a 150,000-seat stadium in a country that actively criminalizes international communication and completely cuts itself off from the global market is the ultimate paradox. It is an arena built not for consumer enjoyment, but for mass synchronized obedience, a monument to the regime's obsession with absolute control over the collective body. And what's equally mind-boggling is that the authoritarian system seems to really work for the Youth World Cups. Physical conditioning, endless repetition, and tactical discipline indeed help the state to win major tournaments. This juche experiment has successfully proven that if you take young athletes, insulate them entirely from the distractions of the modern commercial world, and subject them to a brutal survival of the fittest training pipeline, you can routinely manufacture FIFA champions. The country's women's team is marching into the World Cup not as a historical footnote, but as a highly disciplined, tactically serious army of athletes who have spent their entire lives training to survive under pressure. The supreme leader can comfortably welcome the athletes at party headquarters, hand out national medals, and use their sweat to forge a false illusion of national prosperity. Somewhere in the Kimdom, 90 minutes are being played. The whistle blows, reality takes the pitch, and someone still has to defend the far post. The sweat and the joyful tears. It reminds us that, regardless of the political system and cultural differences, the beautiful game remains stubbornly human. The state can build the stadium, script the headlines, and demand the trophy. But for 90 unscripted minutes, the freedom on the pitch belongs entirely to the players and all the viewers.